Hi, you guys. Hello, everybody. Hello and welcome. I feel a little bit out of practice because I haven't filmed a video in a while. I'm going to post a backlog of videos from earlier on different kinds of anthuriums and stuff. But look at this. So this over here is an Oncidium orchid. It's a Sympodial orchid, and I think it's incredibly underrated. Such a profuse bloomer, and yeah, let's get into it. This one's amazing. So this one over here is called Golden Shower, I think. It was sold to me as a Cambria orchid. So in orchids, when the parentage of the plant is a little too ambiguous and they can't tell what type of orchid it is down to a species or hybrid level, they'll call it a Cambria. But I'm pretty confident that this one's Golden Shower, which is a cross between two different orchids. It's Oncidium reflexuosum and Gomisa flexuosum and Oncidium sphaecephalum. So those are the two parent species of this one. Oncidiums are sympodial orchids. So what this means is they produce a crown that grows pseudobulbs off of it, and I'll get into that in a second. So there's two classifications of orchids. You're going to have sympodials, or some people call them polypodials, and monopodial orchids. So monopodial orchids are the ones that you're more accustomed to seeing in, flower markets, and I'll show you an example of that in a sec. So this is what I mean by a monopodial orchid. It has one crown, the leaves overlap one another, and it grows up and up and up on a singular stem. It doesn't have offshoots. Occasionally it'll propagate from the flower spike in what's called a keiki, which is basically a baby plant that takes the place of the flower, but you won't see these grow offshoots. So they're more prone in general to root rot, stem rot, that kind of thing, because it's really easy to get water caught in the middle joint here, which they do not appreciate. My orchids are all in bloom, by the way. I'm so happy about this. So this is what I mean by sympodial. This over here is the pseudobulb. This over here is the leaf fan. This is the flower spike. So you know that your pseudobulbs are mature when they start getting kind of a ridge here. And then the leaves, the bottommost leaves, either turn yellow and fall off, or they reflex sideways like this. You can tell the direction that the plant's growing in pretty easily. So old pseudobulbs will lose all of their leaves. This one's in the process of doing that just as it matures. This is the first pseudobulb. It got bigger. Second pseudobulb got bigger. Third, fourth, and the new growth is behind here. The new growth is just vegetative, so this will not bloom this year. Once a pseudobulb blooms, it will not bloom again. And if in succession one of your pseudobulbs does not bloom that season, it will not bloom later. But I cannot stress this enough. Keep these on your plants, because if you cut off the pseudobulb, it's not going to have enough energy to produce this bloom spike. And you're going to kind of miss out on, the big spectacle of this flower. So Oncidium type orchids typically bloom indoors around winter time. You can get them to bloom, profusely throughout the year with correct culture, warm temperatures, relatively high ambient humidity, etc. Some people have success blooming them also in the summer and the spring, but for the most part, this tends to be a winter bloomer inside. Oncidiums are high light plants. This is not an orchid that I would recommend putting in the center of a house or away from a window. If you have close by supplemental lighting, that's ideal. If you have like a south-facing window up here in Canada or the States, that's ideal. North-facing window in like Australia and New Zealand. They're not very pest prone. They're not pest magnets, definitely not like dendrobiums, for example. But you can get aphids. You can get thrips on these too. Thrips tend to not like them as much though for some reason, which is a good thing, because thrips seem to love everything. Another thing that you're going to notice that's kind of different from other orchids is these are epiphytic, which means that they grow on the sides of trees, but they're almost terrestrial in the form of their roots. So they have really, really wiry roots. I don't know if you can see here. Not like a Phalaenopsis or moth orchid, but, they don't turn green very much when you water either. They tend to stay this wiry kind of white color. Um, they have a sheath on each root, which is called the velamen. If you pull on that after watering or inspecting your plant and it comes off entirely and you're left with just the ropey root cortex inside there, that means that it's been rotten away and you should probably cut that out. If you notice any foul odor in your media, you should definitely cut that out too. So another thing I want to say about Oncidiums is they do like aeration in their roots, but it's not like a moth orchid, for example, where they need light to, photosynthesize via their root structures. Oncidiums are okay in dark pots, as you can see here, but you're going to want good aeration. This is a good size. Oncidiums will only bloom for you if they're compact in their pot. They're a kind of plant, much like a clivia, where they really need to be snug. Sometimes that'll take 2, 3, even 4 years to achieve. So with some orchid care, people recommend cutting the spike down to a closed node, about half to a third of the way up the spike to get, a secondary flush of blooms. I would not recommend that on Oncidiums just because there's such a specific reserve of energy kept in these pseudobulbs here. And forcing it to bloom, a second or third time on the same spike tends to be detrimental to the new growth. And this over here is, the future of your orchid. They'll always grow in one direction. And they tend to grow really, really tight. This one's actually producing another pseudobulb down here. So I don't know if you can see right in there. That's the newest growth kind of in the front. It looks like a little, cone. When you're dividing these, best time to divide these, I would say, is probably the fall, kind of autumn time, just because they tend to slow down in their growth cycles. Make sure, and this is a really good rule of thumb, if you want your Oncidium to bloom and you don't want it to just sit and be vegetative for years and years and years, make sure you have at bare minimum 3 mature pseudobulbs. So I don't know if you can see here, we got 1, 2, and 3. Bare minimum. You do not want to go less than this when you're dividing them. Some people will grow Oncidiums with aquaculture and hydroponically. I don't recommend that. I recommend growing with really, really shredded fir bark. You don't want to let it sit for too long because then it tends to acidify and they don't tend to appreciate the acidification of their growing media. You can mount these to planks much like a staghorn fern, but once again, I wouldn't recommend that because it doesn't hold moisture quite as much as you'd like it to. These guys are sensitive to water quality. If you're using just regular tap water, it could be too fluoridated. The chlorine in there can yellow the leaves, so I'd really recommend rainwater or distilled water, but with distilled water, you have to be careful that you have enough nutrients available. So for distilled water, I would use a liquid feed fertilizer. You can use like a granular orchid-specific fertilizer. Really interesting tip that I learned the other day is that if you rub the insides of banana peels on the leaves, it can actually be really healthy for the cuticle of the plant. And it has, macronutrients such as magnesium in it. So that's actually really good for promoting blooms. So, and I'll give you guys some close-ups too, because this is a really beautiful orchid. But the smell. So I'm just going to describe the smell, because this is probably the nicest thing I have smelt in my life, and I'm not even hyperbolizing. This is such a good smelling orchid. So it smells, okay, so not all Oncidiums are going to be fragrant. I have a few upstairs that actually don't smell like anything. They're really, really beautiful, but they don't smell. When you're at the store, it can be a little misleading because sometimes Oncidiums will not be fragrant at the store and then they'll develop their fragrance later on, depending on the stage of bloom, depending on the maturity of the plant and whether the plant itself is comfortable where it is. Temperature is a very huge thing for these. They really like room temperature, kind of 21, 22 degrees Celsius. I think that's like 73 or something weird like that Fahrenheit. But the smell is just like, wow. So this particular one smells kind of like coconut, but it smells like coconut with chocolate. It's so hard to describe. So imagine you have a gardenia flower. You roast it in coconut shreds and then dip it in chocolate and then dip it in vanilla and then dip it in the most expensive perfume you can find and then coat it in cinnamon and French vanilla powder and whipped cream. That is what this orchid smells like, and I could not recommend it more. The inflorescences on these guys can get pretty huge. This is not the biggest they get. They get about twice as large, and sometimes you can get 2 or even 3 pseudobulbs blooming at the same time. This grows pretty similarly to a Sympodium orchid, actually. You'll notice that the blooms are most fragrant about a day after they bloom. So this is a newly opening inflorescence. This one over here opened yesterday, so this over here is definitely, the most fragrant class within this spike. So Oncidiums come in all sorts of different colors. They like drying out between waterings for sure. They're the kind of plant that likes a good soak for 15 to 20 minutes, and then they like going not bone dry, not like a dendrobium, for example, where they can handle periods of drought. These guys are definitely the kind of plant that likes being consistently moist, but just a lot of water at one time and then holding back, but not letting them get entirely moist. So I'm going to make some more videos for sure for you guys. When this is done blooming, when about 90% or so of the blooms have faded and fallen off, I would cut all the way back here, honestly. I wouldn't leave any branches over just because then you're focusing on vegetative growth. But yeah, 10 out of 10, 15 out of 10, I recommend Oncidiums of all types. I mean, they're just wow. Like, the whole entire room here smells. It's just incredible.